10 years ago suddenly opened a huge gate that leads to another dimension, and no one could even imagine that from this gate huge monsters began to appear, and their number was so huge that the world army could not cope with them because ordinary weapons did not work on them. But at the same time there appeared hunters who had magic power, and their classes were distributed from the highest to the lowest, and that they were much stronger than ordinary people, and with the help of their magic and magic weapons, they could destroy one monster after another. 10 years later, in the city where the first gate appeared, a lot of hunters would go out to make money and kill monsters in the dungeon. And now we see two hunters who met after many years of dungeon adventures together, and as they talked about the old days, the other hunters began to slowly converge on the place where the gate had opened. And while some were approaching, others were able to set up for the battle and drink their last cup of coffee. But at that moment, a guy named Jin Woo appeared. If you ignore his somewhat unusual strength and regeneration, it's a little embarrassing that he can call himself a hunter. And entering a construction site that was in Seoul, two hunters noticed Jin Woo and started waving at him. But the other hunter couldn't understand if Jin Woo was a strong hunter. Everyone was so happy that he had come. But Mr. Kim started to reply that this guy is the weakest in the world, and that he's so weak that he can get hurt in a ranked dungeon, and his coming means that their dungeon will be easy. And as soon as he took his cup of coffee, and then started walking up to the other hunters and greeting them. And as he passed the guys he had recently greeted, he heard them tell him that they called him the weakest weapon in the world. And before he could reply, he could hear everything. At that moment, he heard the familiar voice of the girl Joo-hee, who was also in this raid. The new girl started asking him how he managed to hurt his face this time, to which Jin Woo began to reply that he didn't know because he always gets hurt when he hunts. But sitting down on the building materials, he began to explain that they were in the E-rank dungeon, and he was the only one injured because the others were ranked higher, so they didn't take healers. And after talking for a few more minutes, Jin Woo heard that the other hunters were getting ready to enter the gate, and that they should join them too. And approaching one of the hunters, he began to say that it was time for him to try his best. He might not be the best fit for this role, but he would like to be the leader of their group for this raid. But the other hunters realized that he was the only strongest of them, so no one was against it, and gathered all the equipment. They started to go into the dungeon together, to destroy the boss and make more money. Jin Woo, who was the last one to enter, was ready to give his best today, because today he would not get hurt, and he would survive, and he would earn more money to take care of his family just like the others. A little while later, he managed to get one magic stone. But suddenly, he was attacked from the corner by a monster because our hero had a bad weapon. He was injured and maimed. But this time, he was lucky to have a healer girl who used her magic to help him. And while she healed his wounds, the other hunters dealt with all the monsters that were in the dungeon. After that, they gathered in a place and started to thank each other for having each other's backs. But Jin Woo wasn't as happy as the others, because he still took a lot of damage and made the girl stay by his side and heal him early. Well, at some point, one of the hunters shouted that he had found a secret passage to another cave, and they all started to go to the cave and explore it. And after a short time of thinking, they realized that there was a double dungeon hidden here, and now they had to decide what they were going to do next, because if they went out, other hunters would come in and take all the goodies for themselves. But the leader of the group started to suggest that they would now vote on whether to go into the double dungeon or go back out. And after a short time of voting, they were evenly divided. The last person who did not vote was Jin Woo, and now he will decide what to do next because he needs to help his mom, who is in the hospital, and his sister, who wants to go to university. After a short time of thinking, he clenched his magic crystal that he held in his hands and decided that he agreed to go to the double dungeon. A little while later, our group of young monster hunters continued to walk through the deep cave, but they realized that they were on their way. If they could destroy the dungeon boss, they would still have 20 minutes to get out of the dungeon because it would automatically close. But at this point, the healer girl was a little angry with Jin Woo because she kept treating his wounds and he kept walking and made himself a threat. But after a few minutes, they reached the end of the cave and saw a huge door in front of them. And without thinking, the squad leader started saying that they were going to go inside that door, so everybody should be on their guard. Well, as soon as the door opened, they went inside. They saw that the facels that lit the room started to light up on their own. 59. But the hunters had never seen a dungeon like this before. And inside, it looked like no one had been here for a long time. And those statues, they looked strange, because each one was holding something different, and some of them even had musical instruments. Well, the most amazing thing was the huge statue that was in the center, and looking at it, Jin Woo hoped it wasn't the dungeon boss. But after walking a little further, they came across a magical seal with the rules of the Carrion-on Temple written on it. The first was to worship the Lord, the second was to praise the Lord, and the third was to prove your loyalty to him. And while the other hunters were familiarizing themselves with the rules, the healer girl who was near our hero said that the eyes of the huge statue had just looked right at them. 68. But right after that, the door through which they had entered suddenly slammed shut, and some of the hunters couldn't understand what was going on here. One of them began to say that he had had enough and was leaving now because it was a mistake to come here. As soon as he came to the door, a huge statue that was on opposite sides of the door suddenly moved and started swinging its huge axe, and with one blow it destroyed the hunter. The other hunters couldn't believe what had just happened and that they had to fight these huge statues. Jin Woo quickly turned his head and looked at the huge statue that was behind him, and in an instant the huge statue started to look straight into the eyes of our hero. It was not the first time for Jin Woo to be in a deadly situation, and during his first raid he was left behind and lost, and even almost died of starvation when he was trapped in a dungeon. But the worst part is that he has to work twice as hard to take care of his family. But at the same time, he saw the eyes of a huge monster looking straight at him, and at the same moment the eyes began to glow with bright fire, and Jin Woo shouted for everyone to fall to the ground as bright rays began to appear from the eyes of the huge stat that destroyed everything in its path, and most of the hunters simply died on the spot. And raised his eyes. The hunters saw that they were miraculously alive, but still they could not understand how they could kill all the statues, because it would take a long time.
But sometimes sinister and very dangerous monsters can lurk behind gates. I turned your arm, but the bleeding never stopped. I don't know how else I can help you. I don't know what more can be done myself. I didn't think it would be this difficult. I only invited 3 healers and I thought we could do it faster. But it's so dangerous here that one of them was killed so brutally that there was nothing left of him. The second one was rendered speechless and went into shock from what he saw. The third healer, whom you know, can't get her act together. If she survives, this situation will haunt her for a long time. As you can see, it's going to be hard to heal with their skills in this situation. I don't think we can do anything with him. His look inspires great fear. Eventually they decided that when the situation subsided a little, they would try to escape, but it wouldn't be that easy. Desperate, the rest of the group didn't understand why they had come here. After all, this is only a D-rank dungeon. Our protagonist realized that if they went through that big statue, there was no way they could get past the guards guarding the door. "I'm not going to die here," shouted one of the hunters. "I just joined a normal guild, I'm strong, so I can get out." At that moment their leader cried out, "Don't do it." But nothing could stop him anymore. He could only rely on his speed skills. He rushed like a bullet, running with all his speed, but in an instant the statue spotted him and shot out its laser eyes. All that was left of the runner was his legs. He never made it. Everyone was shocked by what was happening. Everyone who saw it was so dumbfounded that they couldn't look at what had happened. Everyone, as one, understood that they could be massacred at any moment. Jin Woo understood that they could kill them at any moment, but those creatures did not, and they did not understand why. That big statue doesn't kill for no reason, but those guards who guard the door sweep away anything that comes near them. From the attack, they have some kind of order, thought Jin Woo. Exactly an order, how I didn't think of it before. Does anyone know if this room has its own rules? When he saw the precepts of the Kartanon temple, he shrieked, "This is it." He turned to his friend Song for help. What was the first commandment? Have you read them? He asked. The commandment seems to say, "Worship the Lord," answered Sanga. Then that is the Lord, sir. This dungeon has its own rules. What are you thinking? Shrieking, Sana. And if I'm right, he doesn't attack those who don't move. It was obvious from Jin Woo's actions that he was not looking for death, but rather wanted to save everyone. He made a decision and realized that the statue only attacks those who stand at a certain height. He finally understood the essence of the first commandment and cried out, "Hear him and bow to the Lord." Everyone thought he was crazy, but he knew it could save their lives. Jin Woo realized that if they worshipped him, it meant directly praising him. This premonition might have saved them. We will live, we will finally get out of this dungeon by worshipping. That was all they thought about, but at that moment, goosebumps went up their bodies, and as soon as they looked up, they saw the terrifying smile on the statue's stone face. His expression changed. What is it? Our hero shrieked. How many times has he attacked us already? How many more times do we have to worship him? We were all wondering the same thing. It seems to have stopped. I don't think he's going to do anything worse. Will it be okay just because we worshipped him? 555, don't get up. If you get up, his attacks will continue. Look, nothing happens, and then they realize that, like, it's over. We survived, we can stay alive. But the protagonist didn't think so, he realized it wasn't over. There were loud noises, and it felt like an earthquake had started. They saw the statue begin to rise from its throne. The statue was so big that the hunters seemed like small cockroaches against it. Jin Woo, tell me, do you have any more ideas? Shrieked Sanggu, but at that moment our hero stared dumbfoundedly at the scale of the statue that was coming in their direction, and it seemed to be the end. But Jin Woo remembered that this dungeon has its own rules. 1. Swear an oath to the Lord. 2. Exalt the Lord. That's supposed to be the solution, isn't it? Exalt exactly, cried one of the hunters. He was one of the members of the church choir and knew how to sing and pray. He pulled out his cross, which hung around his neck, and began to praise the Lord. They thought it worked. The statue even began to move more slowly. But Jin Woo realized too late that that hunter was praying to the wrong god. The statue straightened up in an instant, stepping on the hunter who was reciting the prayer. They began to run with all their feet and shout for help, until one of them cried out, "Run together, it's dangerous. We have to split up." Jin Woo took hold of the hand of the girl who was running behind him and realized that if he let her go, she would be finished. As Buck ran, he remembered what he was here for, and how his wife had begged him to find a safe job. But he wanted to earn more, and here he is standing under the stone statue, thinking he is safe here. He doesn't hear anyone shouting at him to turn around and see that there's a monster behind him that will cut him in half in an instant. "Exalt the Lord! Exalt the Lord!" shouted Jin Woo, running away from them. He did not know what to do. There were guards in the front, a huge statue in the back. They attacked them with anything, sword, axe, spear. They did not care who was in front of them. They had only one task. Kill them all. Jin Woo could not understand why the guards had musical instruments. Perhaps it told him that the guards start acting when they are approached. Thus, it might be the key to the exit. He seemed to understand again what to do next. They started running toward the statues with the tools, and then a miracle happened. They weren't attacking, they were playing young. They started looking for other statues. While Song sat beneath the statue and looked at the monster that stood before him, Jin Woo ran up to the statue, but nothing was happening. He couldn't figure out what was wrong. But then they realized that if the two of them stood under the same statue, it wouldn't play a tune. Jin Woo immediately ran on, but the huge statue spotted him. At this point he ran up to the statue with the instruments, but it turned out to be a guardian, and instead of instruments he had a shield. He mistook it for another and struck, and Jin Woo was wounded. He did not, however, give up the suspense of dying there and crawled on, hoping to find the statue with the musical instrument. He was always on the cusp of death, always grasping the thread that kept him from dying, but now it could break at any moment. As soon as Jin Woo heard the tune, he sighed. For a second he thought he was going to be killed, but at the last moment he was able to get to safety. He was wounded and exhausted. Julie came running as soon as it was safer, and from what she saw she couldn't hold back the tears. "Your legs!" she shouted at the top of her voice. She saw a lot of blood that was everywhere. Jin Woo was lying on the floor without one leg, but the healer begged him to hold on a little longer, and she could stop the blood and heal his leg. However, she did not expect that the fact that she spent a lot of mana would make her feel bad. She'll be fine. Lucky that Jin Woo was able to survive such injuries. There were 17 of them, but in the end there were only 8 left, and 2 of them were severely injured. "Mr. Song, it's unfortunate that you are injured, but it's because you made a lot of rash decisions. After all, you are the reason this happened. Are you willing to be punished for that?" "That bastard is attacking again," the group of survivors thought. "Don't tell me he's attacking again." They felt everyone's legs buckle and thought it was an earthquake. But the monster lifted something off the ground. This was the altar on which the sacrifice was to take place, and the final commandment, "Prove your faith." "This was the final test, no matter how foolish I was," said one of the hunters. "I know where this will lead. Mr. Song, does this mean that someone has to sacrifice himself?" 5. Aiming his dagger at Mr. Song, one of the hunters began to say that everything was his fault. He said that his 10 men had died in vain because of him and that he should take all the blame. Mr. Kim was right, and no matter what happens next, I'm willing to take responsibility. The only one who was against it was Jin Woo. He started screaming that it was mean to say he was guilty, since you all decided to come here on your own. At this point, Mr. Song walked into the circle of the altar and saw a strange light that lit up red. One tribe told Jin Woo, what could it mean? He asked the guys to help him get to the altar. They thought they were safe now, but the gate had opened a week ago, and it was unlikely the hunters could save them now. But these things will move before reinforcements arrive. The guild is not likely to dare send someone to check here so quickly. It's only a D-ranked dungeon. The gates will open after 7 days. That means if we don't close it, all the monsters can make it to the surface. If we can't do that, that big statue can get out. Most likely, the ordeal will begin when all the survivors are able to enter the circle. So it did, once everyone was assembled and all the lights came on. There was a sound of the hunters shouting, did the door finally open and we could get out, but now anything could happen. The statues that were standing still began to move. They slowly but surely watched the altar. They didn't know what to do, and there were so many of them and a little bit of them began to surround them. The group of hunters began to realize that if they didn't look at the guards, they would keep moving. The group of hunters began to realize that if they didn't look at the guards, they would keep moving. But what was that? She was able to run out of the cave, but the genie Wu realized that if one person leaves the altar the lights go out and the gate closes a bit. Those commandments were hard, but the last one was very clear. When they went into the circle, the lights went on and went out as long as the person left the altar. The hunter who stood and held the wounded Jin Woo could not endure and asked forgiveness, then rushed to the exit, from which Jin Woo fell to the floor because he was missing one leg. He shouted, stay where you are or we will die. There aren't enough of us all to look at every statue. Jin Woo understood that. He understood that all the blue lights had to burn out and then the ordeal would be over. But it could also mean the opposite, that the doors could close back. No one would think that the weakest hunter could be so useful. Everyone looked up to him. Many died when they entered the dungeons, but those who survived, thanks to you Jin Woo, thanks to you, and I am alive, but I can't stay here anymore. I have a family too. I can't die here. Mr. Kim shouted to Jin Woo. But all he heard was sorry. He ran off and threw the rest of Jin Woo to his death, dumbfounded by such an act he certainly didn't expect. The gate was about to close, and now they realized that everyone had to leave, but one person would stay and sacrifice himself. So it was decided that Jin Woo and Madame Chiyul would leave together and Mr. Song would stay. But as soon as Chiyul wanted to get up, her legs, they did not obey her. It was because of the depletion of mana. She used it a lot when she healed Jinhua. Mr. Song, help her get up. I can't walk with my leg. You are the only one who can help her. Take care of her. As soon as they left, Jin Woo was left alone. He sat by the altar and thought only that thank God he is the only one, so something will die here at least. He sat alone and was ready for the outcome. Since it came to this, I will take one of you with me, he shouted. Go ahead and attack. I am not afraid of you anymore. The guards started to attack him blow by blow, and it was almost over. The only thing our hero thought about was that he changed his mind about dying for sure. He didn't want such an outcome. The last cry that was, if only I had been given one more chance. My eyes were closing, but out of nowhere an alert popped up that said you had completed all the necessary requirements of the secret Brave Man's mission. It was that last chance to become a player of the system and survive, but it needed the player's permission. If you refuse, your heart will stop in 2 seconds. Jin Woo was dumbfounded, but the fact that he wanted to live did not negate the fact that he would not agree. He made a decision. The bright light woke me up, and when I opened my eyes and woke up in the hospital, I could hardly breathe. I had just died. But what was it really? Maybe it was a dream, but I started to turn my head and saw that I was in the hospital. At that time, 2 guys in suits came up to me. Turns out they were waiting for me to wake up, but I didn't realize who they were. And when they got closer, they apologized for the disturbance. It turned out to be the Korean Hunters Association. I didn't understand what they wanted from me, but when I found out I had been asleep for 3 whole days, I couldn't believe it. After that, I started asking them questions about what happened to Mrs. Juhee and Mr. Song. I hoped they were safe. But these guys responded that they were fine, but that Mr. Song would now have trouble working because of one arm, and from then on, if he wanted to, he could retire. And Juhee, being a hunter, is still being treated for psychological trauma, and it is not clear to them now whether they will remain hunters. As soon as they started looking for other hunters like sick, I interrupted them and told them that was enough. I had heard everything I wanted to hear, and I didn't need any more. But the man went on to tell me that only 6 people had survived after visiting the double cave. Although hunters are always in danger when hunting, this kind of carnage doesn't happen very often. When the Hunters Association and the White Tiger Guild arrived on the scene, they had all disappeared, and there was only me lying on the altar in the cave. Neither the statues nor what the others described were found. We have been unable to find an explanation for what happened, but this is only a theory. However, these guys believe that I went through a rebirth. I certainly couldn't believe it, because a hunter's stats are set when he doesn't get the awakening or the power. Some hunters can get awakening again and rise in rank, but these guys brought with them a gauge of magical power, and all I had to do was put my hand on the crystal. If these were the high-level, deadly monsters the survivors had told me about, ordinary hunters would not be able to handle them. Only rank units or S ranks could make a difference, but when they put their hand on the crystal, all these monsters simply disappeared. Then they suspected that Hunter Song Jin Woo had been reawakened, since he was the only surviving hunter. But after I got my hand in, they thought I was trash, and because the lowest E rank is at least 70, and I turned out to have 10. After that, the man said they suspected me for no reason, and they left. When they walked out the door, I didn't realize that they hadn't noticed what was right above my bed hung a notification system that had a message. I turned my attention to my leg, and it was in place, even though it had been completely cut off. And there was nothing wrong with my pierced breast. I couldn't tell the difference between this dream and reality and wondered, should I have told them what I was seeing in front of me now? And it certainly wasn't a touchscreen. But at one point my sister came into my room and asked me what I was doing, because I was just standing on the bed poking my finger in the air. She asked me how I was feeling, and after that she immediately jumped on me, because she was telling me not to get hurt again, because she was very worried about me. She kept yelling, "What about the others? Is everything okay? So why am I the only one who got hurt?" But I was in my own thoughts and couldn't believe I almost left her. I didn't think I'd made it out of that dream. But that message spoke back to me. I asked my sister if she was seeing what I was seeing, but she didn't understand what I was starting to say. I told her that when there was an unread message in play, how could I read it? She didn't understand what I was talking about, but seeing my message, that I had become a player and had a daily task to become stronger. I didn't understand what it was all about. A little later my sister came out of my room and along with her girlfriend started to leave. I started reading my alerts. It said that the system would help the player grow. If he disobeyed the orders of the system, he could be punished. And I also had some rewards, but I couldn't figure out what they were telling me. Well, for a second I thought I saw something similar when I was lying on the altar. The first thing that interested me was that I saw a message about the daily Prepare to Get Stronger challenge. I decided to check it out and opened this message. Inside were the instructions for the quest, and its purpose was to work out push-ups, abs, and squats, as well as exercise and running. However, below was a warning that if I didn't complete the daily quest, I would be sent to the village instantly as punishment. But I thought it was some kind of joke, so I decided to continue lying down and resting, only to find out about everything after a good night's sleep. However, I suddenly woke up to the fact that my bed started jumping in different directions, as if an earthquake was about to start. In an instant, I found myself in some kind of desert. I couldn't believe my eyes, because I thought I was dreaming. But when I turned my head, I saw a giant poisonous centipede looking right at me and wanting to eat me. Immediately after that I got the quest instructions, and the penalty task stated that I needed to survive in 4 hours. But for me, that was something horrible. I was running away on all my feet, for I was trying to survive in strict accordance with the mission, but the monsters were chasing me the whole time. They jumped out of all the barcons and sands that were near me. But once 4 hours passed and I got my alert, I managed to survive. I finally finished my adventure and at one point found myself in my hospital room. I jumped out of bed like the ground was sandy and fell to the floor, just as I did. I was terribly exhausted, for I had been running for 4 hours from the horrible monsters that were chasing me. When I was finally able to raise my head, I saw a notification that said that my reward for completing the punishing task had been received and I could take it. However, I was so exhausted that I immediately fell asleep. At the same moment a nurse came into my room and saw that I was lying beside my bed. There was a lot of sand around me. She immediately started calling for help. The next day, this nurse was telling her colleague if she knew of a patient named Jin Woo. She had heard that there was such a hunter who was now resting in their hospital, but it turns out that he runs every day, even though it has been several days since he woke up. The doctor said that hunters heal faster than ordinary people, so light exercise is helpful. But when they looked out the window, they saw that I was still running. But I was running and I didn't realize what all this easy exercise was, and I didn't realize if it was good that I was doing it. But I had been running for almost 4 hours since I woke up, and there were a few things I managed to learn. The first is that the thing in front of my eyes is not an illusion. For I can clearly see with my own eyes, though no one else can. And when I finally completed the last quest, the 10K run, I got my reward for the quest and was able to pick one of the cells. It was a status recovery, and at one point I got magic that could heal my fatigue after training. The fatigue that didn't make them all in my body actually disappeared, as if it hadn't happened at all. Also, I still had stats and random boxes, and I can improve any character trait until I run out of points. I get stronger when I increase a player's stats, and this level up does the same thing. Yes, and the skill status, inventory, and stored items all felt like a game. I never figured out what was really going on, but at this point in my characteristics I was level A. My strength was 10, intelligence 10, dexterity 10, perception 10, and toughness 10. I still had 3 points left that I could use. In the evening, I went to the front desk and asked if I could leave tonight, as I had some business to take care of outside. A little later I found myself outside the subway entrance, and it was time to find out what this thing was in my hands. After all, every time a random box appeared after completing a daily task, sometimes it contained unnecessary items. But what I was holding in my hands was something else entirely. It was a key that allows me to instantly create a dungeon, and I can use it in the third entrance to Hair Station. This key allows me to instantly create a dungeon, and I wondered if this could all be because of an overactivation or possible overactivation procedure. But if it was, I should try it, because finally the weakest hunter in the world gets overactivated. Others would have laughed upon hearing this, but I was confident in my ability to escape, and if it was as dangerous as the last time, I would escape despite all obstacles. As soon as I inserted the key, a portal opened, into which I immediately entered. As soon as I stepped out of the portal, I was notified that I had entered an instant dungeon. However, the entrance behind my back instantly closed, and suddenly a girl walked beside me, just passing by. I realized that it was some other dimension, because it didn't look like a normal dungeon, and I had never seen anything like it before. Perhaps it must be like a red gate. Now I didn't know what to do, because I was planning to run away if something went wrong. If the exit had closed, I couldn't get out of here. A little later I got a notification that I couldn't leave the dungeon until I killed the boss. It was kind of weird, since it had been days since I had fought Irang monsters, and now I had to clear all the dungeons myself. I had a strange feeling inside, as if someone was mocking me. After all, they were seriously counting on me to be able to deal with this without a team. I guess I overestimated my capabilities. After all, I seriously thought I could handle it without the group, but when I started to move on, I saw that everything around me was destroyed, as if an apocalypse had occurred. I kept walking, but I felt less and less confident, because there was a strong ominous atmosphere all around me. It was a monster running right at me. I saw some monster leap at me, but I managed to dodge it, and it rushed past me. And when I turned around, I saw a wolf in front of me. It was Riken's Steel Fong. I realized that even 1 or 2 goblins was hard for me. Could I defeat a monster as terrible as him? After all, he was much stronger than I was, and much bigger. And at that moment I felt that my legs stopped listening to me, and I simply could not move. It was all because I was afraid and I was too scared. I didn't think I had suffered any serious psychological trauma at the time, but the monster kept attacking me. It would have bitten my leg off just a little more, but I successfully jumped aside. I didn't have a healer at the moment, and I couldn't afford to get hurt. In an instant, the monster was already near my head. A little more and it would have bitten it off, but my body was so light that I successfully dodged it. I was very surprised, because this had never happened to me before. And then I realized that I was much stronger than I'd been before. I looked straight into his eyes, and barely saved my life. Now I would not tremble with fear, I would fight. I swung and struck that wolf with my hand, which made it fly away and make a hole in the nearest fence. I was surprised at how strong I was, and realized it was probably because of my improved strength. But the Rikon Steel Fawn was still stronger than me. I kept hitting him as he got closer to me. Right up close. And, just as I thought, the usual attacks had no effect on him, and even this monster was stronger than me. This became a problem for me, and I didn't know what to do. After all, it was too hard for me alone, and this wolf managed to hurt me. I realized that I could not defeat it by myself or with the help of a group, healers, or equipment. I had nothing left after that. I began to think what it would take for me to defeat such a powerful monster, and all I had was my body, a weapon with magical power. And if only I had a weapon. But, sure, I had inventory. And as soon as I thought about the inventory, it immediately opened up, and the only thing I had there was a sword, and I was able to get it right out of the inventory. I didn't understand why it was there, but that was the least of my worries, for I now had the most terrifying opponent in front of me, and with a single blow I cut the wolf in half. It was the blade that Master Kim had left in the double phone. My level was elevated. I remembered that Mr. Kim had bought it for 3 million won. It was too expensive for me, because I couldn't afford such a weapon. But now I am going to use it. This inventory I have turned out to be quite a handy thing. After all, I can store anything I want in here. Ever since I got the gun, I'm no longer afraid of those horrible monsters coming right at me. But suddenly I realized that I couldn't lift this sword off the ground. I started pulling it with all my might. Behind me were 2 horrible wolves, coming closer and closer. Finally, I was able to move it and hit one of the wolves. The other wolf grabbed my sword with its iron steel fangs, and then I realized that it was called Steel Fang for a reason. But I could not let Mr. Kim's sword go to waste, and in the end, I was able to chop that wolf in 2. Now that I think about it, those wolves compared to those monsters are too weak for me. Now I can overpower them all and survive at all costs by becoming much stronger. After I defeated those 2 wolves, I found a secluded spot and sat on the ground and pondered. It seems that when I level up, all my characteristics increase by 1 point, and completing a daily task earns me 3 points. Leveling up means that all my characteristics increase by 1. Right now I have 5 points, and I'm wondering how much stronger I can get. Monster hunting and leveling up seem to be the most effective. I wanted to see how much I could improve my characteristics. Even my intelligence and perception can be expressed in numbers, but the important thing is to understand my strength. It has only increased by 10 points, but I already feel an improvement. Is it possible that my characteristics will still improve? Anyway, I understand that I can get stronger as my level increases. Having just defeated 2 monsters, I wondered why the magic cores hadn't fallen off them. After all, I thought all the monsters in the dungeon had such cores. It seemed to be a separate kind of monster. Suddenly an interesting thought occurred to me. If I am under the control of the game system, then probably both the dungeon and these monsters are created by a special system. Perhaps that's why items rather than magic cores fall off of them. After all, I was able to get Ryan's Fong, which turned out to be quite large, and now I can keep it in my inventory or sell it in the store. But when I tried to sell it, the notification showed that my level wasn't high enough to make the purchase. Beginners can't seem to use this feature. I was offered 20 gold coins for this Fong, and I don't even know how much it's really worth, since it's virtual money. But it looks like this dungeon is supposed to be high level, E rank, and it's probably not worth it. I had to decide what to do now, because I can't leave until I beat the boss. I could leave if I got the return crystal, but I don't know if that would even happen. Besides, I'll soon run out of food, even if the boss is too strong to fight him alone. However, it should become possible if I level up a little more, but then I might die before I even encounter him. So I decided that I would destroy any monsters that came near me, and then I would go straight to the boss and deal with him for what it was worth to me. For I have nothing to fear, for I have already died once, and I will not let it happen a second time. I destroyed every wolf that came my way, and each time there were more and more. But as soon as my level rose and stopped, I became even stronger and killed them with ease. For I had decided that I would not give up so easily. So these wolves must not die too easily either, or I would feel sorry for them. I must fight fiercely, as hard as my body can take it. Finally, I realized that if I didn't leave here, I would be killed. Gradually, as I leveled up, I realized that if I died, I wouldn't be able to protect the people I cared about. In the end, I would lose everything I had. I can't just put my hands down like a weakling if I can get stronger. I will even follow these absurd rules, just to survive and keep moving forward, protecting everything I hold dear. And when I have dealt with all the wolves that were in my way, I thought that would be the end of it. In the next hallway, I saw more wolves coming right at me. I was having a hard time, and my body almost didn't listen to me. I knew I could win and continue on my way. Well, at one point during the battle I realized that the blade of my blade was completely blunt, and it would eventually lose its strength. Even if I bought a high-end weapon, it would inevitably become the same when I went down into the dungeon a few more times. There was one occasion when I bought a dagger that cost over 50,000 won. Although it became much easier to hunt, the dagger still broke easily in a boss battle, and I got 3 magic crystals that day. But I still couldn't afford to buy weapons, even though it was exhausting. I decided that I would take care of them one by one using my body. I was grateful for this blade, for it had saved my life more than once today. In the end, I received the title of Wolf Killer. This title is awarded to a hunter who skillfully fights wolves. It increases experience against beast-type monsters by 40%. I was able to get 34 wolf fangs and 2 wand daggers, a traveler's clothing and a return stone. It was more than I expected, but this return stone was too tempting. I didn't know if I should go back, but there was no guarantee that there would be another chance to get stronger so easily. And what would happen to this dungeon after I used the return stone? Will it just disappear? If it's some sort of system-created limited event, then it's very real. And I end up dancing, palm splashing, something I don't know myself. Like a dance on the palm of the Buddha's hand, I stood and pondered whether I should go on or just back off. But at the end, I put the stone back in my inventory and headed forward. After all, I wanted to get stronger, and with each step I was able to raise my level higher and higher. 4. When I fight monsters, I feel a little better and I definitely feel like I'm getting stronger. Unlike normal dungeons where monsters are reborn, these creatures don't feel alive. So fighting them is more like a game where their character is determined. If I can learn their behavior, I can understand where they come from. Perhaps there is a monkey on top and a cat on all sides. I fought them all alone, and was able to defeat them all. For I am much stronger now than before. I'm different now. As they attack me, if a month ago I would have died a long time ago, but now I know how to behave in such situations. In this case, the color of their name changes depending on their strength. White means weak, orange means strong, and red means very strong. At first the color of the Raiken's name was orange, but now it's white and I'm a little stronger. But even with the strength I have now, I'm not sure I can beat that guy. Now I started getting goosebumps when I saw the smoke heading one way. And it's probably due to the increase in my sensitivity, and I can appreciate how powerful the monster is down there. My level doesn't seem to be rising anymore. Besides, my sword won't last long if I fight in vain. Finally, I decided that I needed to go down and see for myself what was waiting for me down there. I kept going down, and I realized that the stairs had gotten longer, and it was a real subway station. And when I finally made it down the stairs, I saw this strange place. And suddenly something fast started rushing right at me, and before I could even blink, something hit me hard with its big tail. But I managed to parry this blow with my sword, but I was still thrown back into the nearest wall, which hit me very hard and made me bleed. I sat and stared at the terrifying monster. And suddenly something fast started rushing right at me, and before I could even blink, something hit me hard with its big tail. But I managed to parry this blow with my sword, but I was still thrown into the nearest wall, which hit me very hard and made me bleed. I sat and stared at the terrifying monster. I stood in front of this horrible monster and looked him straight in the eye. At that moment I realized that the sword could not pierce it, and the blows would have no effect. I need to figure out how to deal with him quickly, because I'm almost out of time. The monster kept attacking, and I realized that I needed a very quick full weight attack. At the same time, I have to weaken this guy's defense. But I have to decide how I'm going to deal with this thick scales. After all my attacks could not penetrate his thick scales, and something had to be done about it. I tried to dodge and defend myself, but I would have died if he had hit me with a straight punch. However, in the end he managed to hit me several times, causing me to be very badly hurt and fall to the ground. Was this the end I had been walking toward all my life? I thought I'd gotten a lot stronger, but it wasn't enough. And how strong would I have to get to kill a monster like that? After all, to escape my past, I am the weakest hunter in the whole world. There had been such rumors about me lately. I remembered being told that there seemed to be people who do such things for fun, and I need to make more of an effort to stop these rumors. This nickname stuck to me because I'm too weak, but I shouldn't brag about my weakness. For I myself know how weak I am, and it is a force that clutches my head and can make me back down. Even false pretenses cannot protect me. And whatever the enemy does, the sheer force of me in fear will make my knees bend and my toes dig into the ground. I am ignored because I am weak or have not been thanked before the force. I thought back to that very day when many men and good hunters died, but I stayed alive. So I have to survive right now. If it is easy to be betrayed, then I must become stronger. For this is where I must overcome all obstacles, and no matter what, I will recover and continue my journey to reach my goals that await me. For I must become even stronger, and all the monsters in my path will fall. Compared to this monster and the fear I felt then, I am completely calm now. Even if there is a monster in front of me that surpasses me in strength, I will still be able to deal with it. I grabbed hold of this big family's neck and wouldn't let it go. I squeezed her as hard as I could, but she resisted me. There were every wall around us that could be. I was choking her with all my strength and screaming for her to die soon. Eventually she began to suffocate. At this time in the hospital, the doctor was asking if I was back in my room. He was wondering why I hadn't come back even after the sun went down. But the nurse at the front desk said that I was almost healthy and would be discharged soon. But the doctor wasn't sure about the hunters, and they should stabilize me in that room, because he had heard it said that high-class hunters, rich and broad class, don't get much money and are in constant danger. And he didn't understand why we were doing such a job. After all, it's horrible to watch the conditions in which hunters work, and it was interesting what they do inside the dungeon. The veterans they get is abnormal. They are covered in blood completely on another level from patients who get into accidents, and it was amazing that they are still alive in these conditions. But the nurse thought it was a miracle since they were able to return from the dungeon, but the doctor said he disagreed, for even the weakest hunters are strong compared to ordinary people. Correct the text for errors, because you can assume they are the same as those monsters in the dungeons. At this time I was finally able to kill that monster, and a notification showed me that I had upgraded. I finally sighed, and now I was sure that I was a little stronger than I had been before. If the next alert showed that I had killed the ruler of the swamp, the blue venomous dewclaw fawn, I could be rewarded with bottles of purified dewclaw venom. It can be obtained by killing a dewlap, and there is a slim chance of its skin falling out, which will become stronger. It will, however, weaken my strength. I also got a dagger made from a dewclaw fawn, and it can paralyze because of the venom on the blade. It gives the effect of bleeding, and I can carry it with me, keep it, or sell it. My clothes were torn to shreds, and my sword was also broken. My whole body was torn like a lat ball, but I finally got a better blade than the one Mr. Kim had. This dagger was made of fawn, not bone, and it had twice the attack characteristics of my last blade. It also has the effect of paralyzing and bleeding. At the time I decided to sell it, I received a new notification that the boss had been killed and the interior of the dungeon would return to its normal state. I looked up and saw everything around me start to disappear, and it was finally over. I started to go to the surface, and I wondered what time it was. But as soon as I got to the top, I saw a soldier, and he started asking me questions about how I was able to get out of there and why I hadn't heard about the transmission. I didn't understand what happened, but when he saw my sword and my shabby clothes, he realized I was a hunter and immediately apologized to me. He said he would see me off, but I wondered what had happened here. After all, there was devastation everywhere and a pile of dead monsters. I realized that a gate had probably opened nearby, and all those monsters were coming out of there. The soldier told me not to worry, those monsters that were nearby had already been destroyed, only one big monster was left on the left. Because of my sensitivity I could feel. I saw a bright light not far away. It was a boss, and besides, it was very big. A lot of hunters were fighting him, the likes of tanks, and the likes of ranged hunters, archers, and mages. At this time, the soldiers asked not to take pictures of it all and to leave the area immediately. But they were interested in what the hunters were doing and how long they would fight. After all, I want them to deal with it as quickly as possible, but at this time, the battle of the hunters was very fast, and some were wounded because of it. Some hunters were screaming for a quick cure for the tank that was holding back the boss's attacks, but all the hunters who were nearby could handle him, because his defense was very strong, and they didn't have that many mages who could handle him. I realized that the mistakes arose because they had only recently been summoned, and also because of their lack of effectiveness as a team. Their too little guy won't be able to do damage since he is a tank. It's a battle of attrition, and healers can't handle such serious wounds. But suddenly I saw that girl Jihu that I recently went through a double dungeon with. She was a B-rank healer and was helping these guys at the moment. However, something strange was going on with her, as she was trying to help, but remembered the horror she had recently gone through. She did not want to back down, for after that she could not go back. And even after a week she still hadn't overcome it, and that was to be expected. After all, I have to overcome it too, and the boss around D rank compared to the boss I fought before is 1 rank lower. If I can weaken his defense, I can beat him, because I need a punch that will penetrate that stupid rock. I gathered all my strength and threw my blade with all my speed. It flew straight at the head. At this time, the hunters who had been fighting the boss realized that if this continued, they would die. They should only hope that a hunter of rank above them would come, and the tank in front of them might die. At this rate. And at that moment my sword flew to the target, and the boss was killed. But the hunters who fought him thought they were the ones who killed him. The hunters kept attacking him, but the boss was already disintegrating, for he was destroyed by my sword, which I threw. Finally, the boss fell, and all the hunters rejoiced that they could defeat him, but some of them guessed that I hadn't fought him before. Now he suddenly collapsed. One guy with a shield realized that their attacks had accomplished nothing, and he realized that something flew into him that helped kill the boss and blew his head off. He stepped closer, saw the sword sticking out of his head, and couldn't believe that such a boss had been defeated by him. But he wondered who had thrown it. The hunter turned around and asked the soldier if he saw who threw that sword. But the soldier started to look around and said that he had been here somewhere, that there was another hunter here. And its power, its destructiveness. He's a hunter high up in the mountains, but at this time I stood and watched, for I didn't think he was going to die. His health was lower than I thought, and Jihu probably saw me, too. The next day I was in my hospital room, training as hard as I could, because now I should be stronger than before. But at one point a nurse came into my room and saw me doing push-ups off the floor. When I saw her, I apologized and got to my feet. However, she was embarrassed to see me without outerwear. She looked at me and thought about how this patient and his body were the same when he was admitted here. After all, he had somehow changed, and it had been a few days. She asked me when I was being discharged from the hospital. I answered that today. And she held up her phone to me and asked if I would mind if she had my phone number. At first I didn't understand what she needed it for, but then she said it was for the results she would send me later. Seconds later I gave her my number. The next day I was already at my apartment, at which point my sister was getting ready for school. But at that time I opened my door and started walking out. I was very sleepy. I saw my sister and told her that if she was going to school, she should be careful of the cars on the road. But she was more interested in my view, because she realized that I had been working half the night as a hunter. When she approached me, she asked that my body looked trim. And she realized that I had gotten a little taller. She didn't think men were still growing after 20 years, but I told her to cut the crap and get an umbrella, because it looks like it's going to rain. But she didn't want to take it, but I insisted, because this folding umbrella wasn't that big, and she'd had enough of making such a fuss about it. Soon she was gone, at which point I looked at my daily assignments and decided I would go for a run a little later. I noticed that my muscles got bigger, and there's no way that my physical status has changed in just a few weeks. So my status is affecting my body as I continue to increase my strength. Most likely my body is changing too, and it's probably because I put a lot of points into the strength box. And I wondered what would happen if I kept going. I hope I don't become a big overpumped dumb jock. Even having a high level is not good without balance. The same will be true for the other stats. And since the synergy between strength and dexterity is good, I'll put some into that. High health is also good, but the higher the stamina, the better. But the problem was still with intelligence, and it seems to be related to magic. But did I need it? I wondered. And when I put all my free points into strength, agility, perception, endurance, and intelligence, everything was now fine. At that moment suddenly I heard the phone ringing for me. And when I picked up the phone, I was told it was from the guild. They were nervous because I hadn't picked up the phone in a very long time. But I apologized and told them that something had happened to me recently, and I had just gotten out of the hospital. But that person was calling me because a month's rent was already trickling in. He asked if I could pay now. If not, could he defer my payment for a month? But I replied that it was okay, I would transfer the money soon. As I hung up the phone, I began to realize that this was a double awakening. And if I really got the double awakening, then I am capable of making money. If I continue to grow at this rate, I could soon become a cool hunter, because hunters kill monsters and make money. The higher the experience, the higher the reward and more worth of magic crystals. To defeat a high-level monster, you have to enter the same level gate. Thus, there is a lot of competition, and low-ranked hunters can enter the gate of rank D or E. Therefore, E-rank hunters are not accepted into guilds. And even if it were the other way around, it would still be problematic for them to find work. Right now my rank in the guild is E, and for me, who has never entered a D rank gate, that would be a prerequisite. People are chosen on the basis of competence. And when I could not yet rid myself of the title of the weakest hunter in the world, should I work well and raise my rank? That question plagues me above all else. My awakening will turn into a wildfire, and people love to gossip. Hunting is a good topic, and the more attention I get, the better I get paid. But angry looks will come over me, and I can't reveal myself until I'm sure. I'll make money first, and it would be great if I could increase my attack power first. The next day I was already near one of the dungeons, and as I got closer, one guy said to go this way. When I got close to him, he said his name was Dongsu and asked what my name was. I answered that my name was Jin Woo, and I was an E-ring hunter. The other guys, as soon as they saw me, said that they knew me and I was a pretty famous person. They started remembering my nickname, and finally one of those guys said it was the weakest hunter in the world after all. But the big guy who was standing next to me ordered them to stop and said that the most important thing was quantity. As he said on the phone, it would be a little difficult for me, since it was a C-rank gate, and I would be exempt from fighting for the time being, but he would pay me 2 million to add to our lineup. It was a good deal for me, and he held out his hand for me to sign. After that, I looked at them and saw that there were 5 C ranks and 4 D ranks. There is a rule that when entering a C rank gate, there must be 10 or more people, and at least half of them must be C rank. Because of this, there have been times when the strength of a squad is only a few. As I was looking over my contract, some guy came up to me, apologized, and told me that we were both still green today. It was Jin Ho. He was 22 years old and had a D rank at this point. He, too, was called up under the same circumstances as me. When I looked up and saw him at full height, it was strange to me, because he was wearing a stupid outfit. But to hell with the darling. I guess he was the son of a millionaire. At this point the head of that hike came up to us and said I should just follow them and take care of the luggage. There's food, clothes, gear, first aid kits, and just about everything you need. And I understood that we would go there without a healer. After that he replied that it was hard for me to understand, but that they could take care of themselves, because they always do. But to me that was silly, for the squad consisted only of tanks and attackers. I continued to read my contract and saw that it said that I acknowledge that I will not blame anyone else for any accidents inside the dungeon and the fact that they did not have a healer. That would be hard to accept. The guys finally started screaming for everybody to go inside, and they're going to beat the monsters anyway. And there was no need to worry about that. And as soon as we started going inside, that guy in the other outfit told me to stop worrying so much about it, because he would take care of me. Here was the time. We were near the entrance of the building and began to gather our equipment. Everyone took their swords and clothes, and I, at the time, slung a large briefcase of equipment and food on my shoulders. We began to move, and along the way the head began to say that it looked like construction had been delayed. Most recently, just 2 weeks ago, the chief had fled abroad with millions, with workers and sponsors left behind. Hard times had come, but I didn't understand why he wasn't talking about it. When I put my bag on, this guy asked me if it would be too hard for me to carry it all and if I would be okay. But I said it wasn't that heavy, and I thanked my strength, because now a bag like that would be nothing to me. That guy started telling me again to stop being so strict or it was okay to be so quiet. But I answered him that he talked too much, for he was boring me with his excessive chatter, and I realized that people tended not to pay much attention to him. And he replied that being a hunter was his hobby, but that somehow made me feel uncomfortable. Finally we came to the entrance of the dungeon, but the entrance was quite large. It was rather unusual. One of the guys asked the head if he was sure about the state of the gate from the orang, because it looked too big. But the head replied that he hoped the guild was reliable, because he had seen people go in and out of there many times. I was looking at that guy in the expensive clothes, and I thought he was coming to the raid for the first time, because he was a little freaked out by the fact that the gate looked big. But the size of the gate isn't that important, because what matters most is the magical energy that flows out of the gate and determines the quantity and quality of that energy. It is then given a rank, and the big guilds take care of gates higher in rank, and gates with lower ranks aren't as dangerous. I realized that, though this was my first trek from rank, the head decided to go in first and told everyone else to follow her. We were ready, and that guy pulled out his big, clean sword as well as his big shield. I looked at him and realized that usually hunters of D or rank like me don't make enough money to buy good weapons. Not to mention the bills. But why did this D hunter have such good equipment? I looked at everyone else and realized that it seems to be making good money. After all, everyone is perfectly equipped, and it's all very different from the dungeons D and E ranks I've been in. And when we went inside, it was too dark, so one of the guys used his magic and lit a big fireball. When the cave lit up, they didn't understand what it was and why there were no monsters here. Also, there were no lights anywhere, although it was normal for a dungeon to have a few glowing stones. Jin Woo asked me if there were no monsters in the dungeon, but I asked him to be quiet. I started listening and realized that if there are no lights here, it means that monsters like darkness. It's usually not easy for them to live in dark dungeons, but if they're unintelligent, it's likely that these monsters don't rely on sight, they move in groups and live in the dark, darting around for light. When I heard the sound, I shrieked, realizing that it was a monster from the insect class, and it was probably an ant's nest. The sound came closer and closer, but we couldn't see them, the tunnel was too dark. Some of the guys started to panic, but I yelled for everyone to look up. And we all raised our heads and saw that they started to appear from above, right above us. Although we didn't realize how many there were, they were all coming down from the ceiling. There were too many of them, and so the battle began. One of the mages used his fire magic and dealt with the insects. The other guy with the shield started screaming and using his aura to get them closer. It turned out that our head was a damager, that's who in the group does most of the damage. I stood behind and watched these hunters and saw that they had a tough job. With this kind of work, they can put together a team without healers. Leader Don Sok was doing his duty well, and they had his back at home. Most likely, they were already fighting side by side. I understood that this was because they always put a team together without healers, and they are a little tough. At this point, Jin Woo and his equipment was good. It covered the lack of experience and skill. Everything was doing well, but it was a little disappointing to me. After all, I was expecting a slightly different kind of dungeon. The group leader started to say that we would be back after we cleaned up at the entrance, and that might take a while. So don't overexert yourself too much and control your powers. We also need to collect all the magic crystals and divide them among the 9 participants. After all, this was my favorite part of the job. Suddenly, however, the leader came up to me and asked how I knew the monsters would attack from above. I replied that I just felt it. In fact, my perception allows me to feel more than my eye can see. Afterwards, everyone participated and thanked me, telling me that I would feel better if I didn't pay attention to such little things. I didn't fully understand what they meant. A little later, we began to look at the insect wounds and realized that they were not any wounds. We had mutilated them as if they had been bitten off, not burns from magic. It turned out that these monsters were already like that before we fought them. There's a territorial feud between them, which means there are monsters here that are stronger than these guys. The leader got excited about this because it could be a boss or someone else. And that means there's a lot of money here. At this point, I asked Jin Woo what kind of sword he was holding that looked very expensive. He replied that it was, and that his father had decided to reassure himself when he heard he was going on his first raid. I told him I wasn't sure, but he should be more careful. I had a bad feeling someone was up to something. We kept walking forward, and I realized that regardless of rank, the size of the dungeon varies, and depending on the circumstances, it could be that it takes weeks to explore the inner passages, or it could be that it's only a couple of hours before you've reached a room. This dungeon is built like a labyrinth, so we didn't have many battles. It did take some time to move, however, although I don't really need to get into battles while I'm dragging my luggage. I thought it was a decent deal, but suddenly a warning popped up to make me wary of lizards. I didn't know why it appeared, but the one thing I was sure of for sure was that my bad feeling was never wrong. And a little later the leader began to say that this is serious, because quite a lot of time has passed, but we still have not found monsters with whole limbs. There are only the corpses of dying monsters. However, there must be a boss here, and if there wasn't one, the gate wouldn't open. But suddenly we froze, and the leader asked his comrade to light their way, which was right in front of them. And when the light came on, we were all frightened, for we saw many monsters shrouded in cobwebs. Rather, we realized that the boss room was waiting for us next, at which point everyone got ready. We were already ready for the battle and went a little further in, but when we went inside, all the guys were surprised. After all, they saw mana crystals. There were so many of them, it looked amazing. Although they were worth less than the crystals dropped from the monsters because of their low energy, but since there were so many of them, it meant that they could bring even more profit than magic crystals. Everyone looked at it and realized that they could get over 10 million. The leader began to look up and think about how his older brother wasn't always right, because he ignored him simply because he got a high rank and traded his country for America just for the money. The leader said he was still considered an elite in America and his brother should not think of him as a despicable man who would grovel at his feet. He decided to capitalize on the situation and increase his squad.